Leaders struggle with confidence. It's true in the best of times, it's especially true now. Leaders struggle with confidence in crisis because those times tend to breed uncertainty, leading to anxiety and doubt and fear sort of being magnified. I can only imagine what the leaders of the children of Israel were thinking as they were about to enter into the promised land and they got the reports back from the 12 spies. The challenges looked huge, the risks were significant, and in a moment in history, many of them chose to stay stuck in fear and in doubt. And so when Israel went forward into the promised land 40 years later, they were left behind. But some chose courage and they pressed forward. Before we ever talk about planning, assessing, and pivoting and executing a new strategy, I think we have to first make sure we get our mind right and our spirit right. How do we do that? I think we can actually take a really good lesson from Admiral James Stockdale. Admiral Stockdale was a Navy pilot shot down in Vietnam in 1965. As a prisoner of war, he spent about 4 years in the darkness of solitary confinement, tortured at least 15 times, survived all of that, and on February of 1973, he was released after 7.5 years as a prisoner of war. When he was interviewed later, he said, "I never doubted not only that I would get out, but that I would prevail in the end." He said it wasn't pure optimism that saved him. In fact, he said the pure optimists actually didn't do well because they would often think, well, we'll get out by this date, and that date would come and go, and they'd still be prisoners of war. And that would happen repeatedly over and over and over again, and they'd start to lose hope. He said it was about frank realism. He went on to say in this interview, "You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they may be." This became known as the Stockdale paradox. On one hand, holding on to the harsh reality, the truths of the current situation, while on the other hand, being able to hold on to faith in the eventual outcome. Seems like a paradox to many because, well, if you're really capturing the harsh reality of the current situation, wouldn't that lead to anxiety, depression? How could that lead you to faith? Or how could you hold on to both at the same time? You see, you and I are also in a war. Now, this war isn't against another country like it was back in the late 60s and early 70s. It's not against flesh and blood. It's not even against COVID-19. We're in a war against our own fear and doubt and uncertainty. And so I think the Stockdale paradox has something to teach us here today. First of all, we need to honestly assess and capture the reality of our current situation. Now, faith does not refuse to be honest. In fact, faith looks at truth in the face, but it also says that what I can see with my eyes is not all of truth. It doesn't capture the whole truth. So how do you identify the truth? How do you confront the truth? Whether you're looking at this in your context or domain as a business owner, a pastor, maybe just as a parent in running the economy of your own household, or as an individual trying to manage your own life and some of the personal goals that you've had that have currently been disrupted. Well, here's a few questions for you, and you could ask a lot more than this, but here's a good starting point, I think. First, what is my current internal response? What is my response in my spirit, in my mind? I think there's a lot of shame right now. I think that a lot of people are thinking things like, why didn't I see this coming? Why didn't I prepare my family financially? Why did I lose my job? Why is this happening to me? Is God still there? Or what have I done wrong? Now, all those feelings of shame are not based on truth, but I think you have to first identify it and own it, not dwell on it, not let that kind of cause you to go into this spiral of self-pity, but own it and then press forward. Second set of questions, what vulnerabilities do I have and what risks are associated with them? Now, businesses regularly do vulnerability assessments just as a point of maintaining healthy programs. But you could do this personally. We all have vulnerabilities, whether those vulnerabilities be weaknesses, addictions, things that we just don't do well, blind spots that we may have. But the great thing is when you identify them, you invite God to come in and to be your strength in your weakness, to provide grace, grace that we all need. And so, first, identify the vulnerabilities and what risks are associated with those so that you can look at trying to mitigate those risks or bringing other resources to bear around you to help you ensure that those risks don't create negative consequences for you, your family, your business. Which leads me to the third and last set of questions, which is what strengths and resources do I have? What strengths can I bring to bear in these areas? What resources can I bring to bear on this that might be available to me that I can access? And these questions, I think, are particularly helpful because part of capturing the whole reality of the whole truth is capturing the positive elements. And these positive elements, in particular, strengths and resources, not only help you with some of the tactical pieces that you're going to eventually employ as part of perhaps your new plan, but they also help shape your attitude going forward so that you're more likely to think of helpful, creative actions. You know, it reminds me of Romans 12 too, because we're told don't be conformed to this world, right? The world is going to try to conform you into its mold. And so that force is always there. But be transformed, Paul says, by the renewing of your mind. Renewing of your mind is this transforming power that pushes out against the constant pressures of the world to transform or conform you, but instead be transformed. There was a non-Christian who actually put this very aptly. He said, control how you program your mind, or the world will do it for you. So we have a choice to make right now as we capture all of the truth of our current situation. And part of it is making sure we capture these positive elements as well. Okay, so first of all, we have to hold on to or identify the current reality, as harsh as that may be. Second, we need to have faith in the outcome. You know, Admiral Stockdale maintained faith in the eventual outcome, that the United States would eventually get him and his fellow POWs home. When that would happen and exactly who would survive the whole ordeal, he didn't know. But he maintained faith in the outcome. We too can have absolute faith in the eventual outcome for each of us as believers. Now, that is not a health and wealth type statement. Believers are going to experience pain, loss, grief of all sorts. In fact, right now, you're probably experiencing some of that. And do you have anxiety over that? You probably do. I think we all have to varying degrees. But again, fear and anxiety aren't from the Lord, and those things are rarely productive. So we confront sort of that thinking with Scripture. 2 Timothy 1:7 tells us, God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. First of all, a spirit of power. Think again about Joshua. You know, everything from a human perspective looked pretty challenging, pretty bleak. The risks were obvious, their vulnerabilities were glaringly clear, but they chose to put their faith in God. That at some level, they chose to be confident in who God was and in his promises, and then that gave them the courage to go forward. And as they had courage to go forward, they experienced God's blessings, and that made them even more confident in who they were as God's chosen people. Somebody once described that as a virtuous circle, that the more you choose to place your confidence in God, the more courageous you will find yourself. The more courageous you find yourself, the more confidence you'll tend to place in God. Second, God has said he's given us a spirit of love. Remember the one who holds you in his hand and holds the future. I would encourage you, just as a practical thing, turn off the news for a day. At least a day. You know, take that time instead and invest it and remembering God's goodness to his people in years past, in centuries past, people who have endured something, situations, crises far worse than what we're experiencing. Remember God's goodness instead. Next, he has given us a spirit of a sound mind or of self-control. So what does it mean that we have a spirit of self-control or of a sound mind? Well, I think part of it is that, practically speaking, that as we go through this in a measured way, we are to do these things, acknowledge our situation. We're supposed to observe our internal reaction. We're supposed to ensure that we direct our thinking according to Scripture, take inventory of our vulnerabilities, our risks, our strengths, our resources, and then take all those things and submit them to God and allow him to direct our thinking as we prayerfully discern how to go forward. Now, that was kind of a mouthful, and I think each one of those things could be a discussion in and of itself. But the bottom line is that you can, with confidence in the Lord, press forward in times of crisis, whether you're leading your family, your business, the church, because we have a God who says that he's going to take all of this mess and he's going to redeem it and he's going to restore it. And one day we know the end game. And that really is a hope that is so much bigger and better than anything that a prisoner of war, somebody sitting in ICU, or you and I could possibly want or hope for. And that is that one day Jesus is going to restore this perfect kingdom, and all of this is going to pale in comparison. But he does care about you in the here and now, and he wants to help you through this process. I would encourage you to just think of a couple of questions, and if you would, leave a comment below. Which is harder for you, to be brutally honest about your current situation, or to maintain faith in the eventual outcome? Or feel free to just simply share whatever you've taken from this and leave a comment below. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Again, let's take time first to honestly face our current situation, and also to hold on to faith in the eventual outcome. Once we calibrate our hearts and minds that way, we can start pressing forward into planning, communication, execution. I hope this has been helpful for you.